The third-party betrayal. How elites and unions use third parties to manipulate American politics for the past decade. Third parties in the United States, often hailed as alternatives to the corporate duopoly, have functioned as deceptive political tools designed to weaken the Democratic vote, ultimately benefiting right-wing agendas. While progressives have long hoped these parties would champion workers' federal rights, immigrants' protections, and social safety nets like the American Families Act, these third-party movements have remained disturbingly silent on these critical issues. Even more damning is their failure to oppose regressive policies like the Laken-Riley Act, exposing them as elite-funded operations rather than true grassroots movements. The illusion of third-party progressivism many Americans have been led to believe that third parties, such as the Green Party, various socialist factions, and other so-called progressive coalitions, offer a genuine alternative to the entrenched two-party system. However, in practice, these organizations often function as controlled opposition, financed by elites and labor unions that refuse to provide honest leadership on workers' and immigrants' rights. Their real impact? Dividing the progressive vote just enough to ensure Republican victories, as seen in multiple election cycles where Trump-aligned candidates have benefited from third-party spoilers. The strategy is simple. Third-party candidates position themselves as more leftist than the Democratic Party, siphoning off votes from working-class and progressive voters. Yet, when it comes to actually pushing for meaningful federal workers' rights or opposing legislation like the Laken-Riley Act, which targets immigrants, they remain curiously silent. This selective advocacy reveals that their purpose is not genuine reform, but rather the maintenance of a political system that keeps corporate power intact. Silence on workers' and immigrants' rights. A feature, not a bug, despite branding themselves as champions of labor. Third parties in the U.S. have utterly failed to advocate for a federal workers' Bill of Rights. They have refused to mobilize around the demand for a National Workers' Compensation Commission and have neglected the urgent need for uniform, federally mandated labor protections that would prevent state-level exploitation. This silence is not accidental. It is a calculated decision designed to avoid confrontation with the very elites who fund them. Similarly, third-party movements have shown little interest in standing up for undocumented immigrants and their families. The American Families Act, which aimed to provide financial relief and support to working-class families, has seen little to no advocacy from these so-called progressive parties. Worse still, when Republicans pushed the anti-immigrant Laken-Riley Act, an insidious piece of legislation weaponized to criminalize immigrants, third-party leaders failed to mount any meaningful opposition. If these groups were truly independent and progressive, they would be at the forefront of these battles, not conspicuously absent from them. The third-party push for Republican whole Washington single-payer and silence on workers' federal rights. Why do Dr. Jill Stein and Kshama Sawant tell us to follow the policy directions of a wealthy doctors group like Physicians for a National Health Program, while they remain silent on what these same doctors have identified as critical needs for American workers? Sawant, Dr. Jill, and PNHP's leadership aggressively sold progressives on whole Washington's incremental single-payer approach. Yet when it came to advocating for a National Workers' Compensation Commission and federal labor rights, they were nowhere to be found. Figures like Jason Call, running for Congress under a progressive banner, told us that worker federal human rights and a National Workers' Compensation Commission could not be discussed alongside Medicare for All and whole Washington state-level single-payer initiative. This is a deliberate misdirection. The truth is, third-party actors have helped push a Republican-backed, business-friendly single-payer framework that benefits corporate elites while blocking a broader labor rights agenda that would genuinely empower workers and immigrants. Union corruption and the third-party charade labor unions, once the backbone of worker advocacy, have also played a role in sustaining this third-party illusion. Rather than demanding a federal labor rights framework or fighting against the erosion of workers' compensation, many unions have chosen to align themselves with elite interests. Their financial backing of third-party candidates serves to divide the left while keeping genuine labor reform off the table. This controlled opposition benefits employers and political elites who profit from a fractured labor movement. Instead of uniting workers under a clear federal platform, third-party movements and unions keep workers distracted with state-level battles that never amount to systemic change. This tactic prevents the formation of a powerful, national workers' movement capable of demanding universal labor rights, fair wages, and protections from corporate exploitation. Who truly benefits? Follow the money. The third-party deception has served the right-wing agenda perfectly, ensuring that progressive and working-class voters remain divided and ineffective. By promoting the illusion of choice, these parties prevent a consolidated push for meaningful economic justice, labor rights, and immigrant protections. The primary beneficiaries of this deception are the corporate elites, Republican politicians, and the wealthy donors who fund both major parties and select third-party candidates to serve their interests. While the American working class faces wage stagnation, declining labor protections, and systemic exploitation, third parties have failed to provide a substantive challenge to the system. Their inaction on federal labor laws, their refusal to advocate for undocumented workers, and their silence on anti-immigrant legislation all point to one undeniable truth. They are not on the side of the people. How many votes were siphoned off by the Green Party that could have prevented Trump's rise to power? This is a critical question that must be examined. In key swing states, third-party votes exceeded Trump's margin of victory, effectively handing him the White House. Yet instead of accountability, we see these third-party figures doubling down on the same tactics, sowing division while ignoring critical labor and immigration issues. Conclusion: time to expose the farce. It is time for American workers and immigrants to see through the charade of third-party politics. These so-called alternatives to the two-party system are not solutions. They are tools of division, used to maintain the status quo. If progressives truly want change, they must demand accountability from labor unions, expose the funding behind third-party movements, and push for a federalized workers' rights agenda that cannot be eroded by state-level manipulations. Real progress will not come from third-party distractions financed by the elite. It will come from an organized, unrelenting demand for federal human rights for all workers and immigrants in the United States.